Let's talk a little bit about 1848. I don't have a whole hell of a lot that I'm going to say, I hope. So, like most of the GMT 18XX games, the components are fantastic. The tiles, incredibly thick. The cards, decent. Counters, as thick as the tiles, really high quality stuff. A hard board. Yes, there are a couple of non-hard blades, but I don't think they're a problem. And of course, these guys are not going to be hard if you're used to the 18XX style of things. The play of it plays cleanly. It seems fairly short compared to most of them. Other people's discussion of it may have influenced me on that a little bit. I sometimes have trouble telling how long they are. The tail end of the game wasn't very long at all. It felt like there was time to develop at the beginning, yet still it didn't take forever to play the whole game, which is kind of a nice factor because I hate the long tail on something like 1870. Some of the games are really bad at that. This one, and I think a lot of this pair of designers, Oakley and Orgler, tend to be kind of quicker paced games and try to cut that smoother version of 18XX without giving away. It's not like it's, oh, let's give you 1830 light or something like that, which the 18AL and I don't know, some of the others really do. And it's the style of game I like. The track is not that sharp angle track that goes every which way and ends up causing problems. However, some of the choices in the game, notably these little white discs, which are used to indicate a gauge change, which, the way the trains work, you got plus trains that are allowed to make one free gauge change, but the other trains have to pay one of their locations, one of their city locations, for the gauge change. Also a little different is the fact that the doinkers, the towns, and the small ports do not count against your city limit. So they become good things to include all the time. They can never block, and they're just bonus money on your route, which is a little weird. It takes some getting used to. But these gauge change markers, especially as you get late in the game and you start running trains that can go over multiple different areas on the board, each of the different areas has a different color scheme to it that indicates where the gauge changes take place. As you hit more and more of those, it becomes painful to count. It also becomes painful to necessarily see where the gauge changes should be placed. So I could easily see someone, once track is covering up, but not necessarily making a boundary cross. It's hard to see as these spaces get covered where that gauge change is going to be, and you have to lift the board pieces to make sure you get it right. You might screw it up. I'm constantly finding myself picking things up to look. But much more problematic than that because, frankly, you have a reference sheet somewhere in here. Shows you a map. I think you do. You got a reference sheet here that shows you what the map looks like, so you can kind of do it off that. But it's more the mechanism of counting those extra dots. It's not easy to remember how to do that. It's not second nature to somebody who's used to playing the 18XX games. Likewise, the doinkers not counting, it adds a little bit more mental complexity to how you're counting your runs out. And I found that to be particularly problematic. I suspect that's mainly because I'm playing solo, where I have to keep the counts of all the different companies in mind. And so if you throw a little bit more complexity into a design, when I play it solo, it becomes harder because I'm keeping track of what all the different route patterns are for all the different companies. And on top of just playing solo and the added complexity of those things, I also have to walk away from the table quite often when I'm playing solo, which I think is something that doesn't happen much. You know, if you might take a food break, but you still probably can remember what you're doing within an hour or so. And a game of this length, you're not going to be walking away and coming back like maybe you would with 18OE or something that's really big and you might be doing over multiple days. So there are a number of funky things in this. One is the loans. They're handled differently from loans in other games of its nature. Loans don't directly harm your company. You don't have to ever pay them back. What they do is they reduce your share value of your company. You've constantly got, and this makes some sense. Corporations often would float various loans, and then those loans wouldn't get called in. As long as they're running a profitable company, they can keep that financing going. The big deal with it is that it hurts your share value. It's very similar to a swallow in that sense. Although the nice thing with a swallow, so if you swallow with a company, it hurts your share value about as much, but you also take that cash into your corporate treasury, and you're not getting that cash. With the loans, you're getting about the same share value hit, but for one loan per turn. Of course, you're only getting $100, which might be better at some points than a swallow would be, but it's definitely worse towards the end of the game when you're looking at buying your big trains, which you might get forced to take the loans. And the whole neat thing with this is share value affects whether or not you fall into receivership. If you fall off the edge of the map, you no longer are running that company. It's worth nothing. It's gone from the game. Worse than that, you owe cash for anybody else who owns shares in it, not for the bank. Those shares, they're not big enough for them to force you to pay them. But you owe cash equal to the par value of that company, which is really bad because, you know, if something's going to head into receivership, it's good to be holding that in a sense. Not so much if it swallows because you're not making money and it's dropping that way. But if it's forced into taking loans for receivership, you know, you're getting something that's in a crappy stock value. You're getting the par value for it, which is kind of a neat factor. You might gamble on, I can make the most money this time by buying up shares of this company, or at least one share, you probably don't want two, that is probably going to fall into receivership. And that's the problem. That's why you can't, I think, orchestrate or engineer sending a company into receivership, at least not on the long-term basis. You might do it right at the end if you're holding two shares, nobody wanted it for whatever reason, because it looks like a swallow monster or something, or they're just afraid, and you don't have to pay off other players. But, yeah, it's very, very hard to get money into your companies. The only mechanisms for getting money into your companies in this game, well, privates. But you paid money out of your company for the private, so they probably is at best a wash for the smaller ones. Privates, swallowing, which hurts your share value, and taking out loans, which hurts your share value. All the share value stuff can throw you into receivership. You can go into receivership without any loans even. Your company just failed somehow. It's a little hard to believe, but okay. It works as a mechanism. That can leave you in a position where, because I think it's hard harder to judge whether or not you're going to fall into receivership. That can leave you in a position where you think you're doing everything right, and maybe you get better at it. I'm sure you get better at it with more plays, but you think you're doing everything right. You've been swallowing, your stock value is not great, and then you get forced to take a loan out just because the way the trains drop, they come too fast, you weren't counting on it, whatever. And boom, now you're just out of the game. Maybe you had a lot of shares of that, that's all valueless. Maybe other people have shares and your other holdings just get wiped out by it. You're not knocked out, but you effectively are. And that can be pretty damn problematic. The runs are huge at the end of the game. That offers a lot of temptation, right? Temptation to build the best routes that you can. One of the reasons they're huge is you have these K cities that spread out throughout the map, and the more of them you connect, the more sort of full value extra cities you get. So if you can set up a good run that hits 2 or 3 of those K cities, you're getting an extra 50 or $100 for your run. And of course, the really impressive thing would be to engineer a diesel that hits all kind of cities. There are companies with enough dots to do it. I don't know if there's enough capability to make money in the game on your corporation to be able to get that huge run. And I suspect if you're doing so, you're not going to have the money to keep that company in your own pocket. I think you're going to end up losing the company, or so you're not going to be able to turn around and make a huge run at the end. Stock values always go up by 1 space, so you're not going to get some kind of big stock value jump by making big runs. It's not one of those games. Everything is 1 space to the right, 1 space to the left, 1 space up, 1 space down. In fact, selling multiple shares is 1 space down. 1 space up is only if something's sold out. What else was funky? Well, the 2 different trains, I found that a difficult choice to make, not knowing what I was doing. Are you going to be crossing a boundary? Do you need a plus train? Or can you get by cheaper? My feeling is early in the game, those 2 trains you can definitely get away with without a plus. The 3s maybe. Everything beyond that, the pluses are almost certainly worth their weight in gold. But you might not have the money to do it. You might not be able to do it. But almost every choice later on is for the plus train. And early, you're probably buying just plain old 2 trains. There's no reason for that plus. You might find there is with some companies. The other weird thing in this are the privates. The privates in this game, you have this weird little bidding chart. Use, I guess, what's a reverse or Dutch auction or something, but I'm never quite sure that that's the right term. But anyway, what's happening is each player in turn gets to lower the price of one thing or buy something at its current offered price, which means the first player can buy any company they want if they're willing to pay the full price for it. You start off with a little bit more money than you have in 1830. The prices are a little bit higher. Maybe you can get away with buying some of these companies at full price. But there's no clear bonus position. So like in a 5-player game of 1830, you buy the sucky value because you know you're getting 2 privates, and that's probably a good deal, no matter what you get, even if they're the 2 cheapest ones. And you might get more. You don't have that kind of situation here, I think. I mean, certainly you could just get 2 companies, but you're paying more for them. You're not getting 2 companies at face value, which is the whole deal with the 1830 thing. You get 2 companies at face value, and that's probably a great deal. Here you don't want them at face value. You want to get that price lower, so there's incentives to wait longer because nobody has enough money to buy up all the privates. So And if you do buy the privates, you may not get that much off of them. And we had someone never get to sell one of their privates. We had a couple people now. There's some protection in this for that, which is that most of the privates that have special abilities, well, all of them that have special abilities, you're able to play that special ability even if you haven't sold it to a corporation and even after the private crashes. So there's a little bit of protection that you get some kind of ability off of it. Of course, if you don't have a company at all, it may not help you much. It won't help you much with most of them because it's an ability that you play for a particular corporation that you're a director of. It also restricts you from selling trains between other players' corporations. And theoretically, there's a no 3-player deal, 3 or more player deals allowed. I have seen 3 or more player deals, and I've never seen them in a kingmaker type situation. So I'm not sure why they're trying to hold that away. It seems like making an agreement, yeah, let's all leave that open, is not an unreasonable agreement between 2 players, and it certainly, it sometimes is not an unreasonable deal to make between 3 players. So I'm not sure why that restriction's in there, and it's put under the etiquette portion, which feels almost optional, right? The etiquette portion is like things like people should try to, make their decisions during other people's terms, which is tough to do. And things like keep your holdings all open, some of which is definitely rules-based. You can always find out what somebody's holdings are, but some of it's more just being considerate. It doesn't feel like you're just being considerate not to allow 3-person deals, and I don't know the cause behind that. Overall, for me, playing it solo, because of the way the routes were hard to count, was somewhat problematic. And enough so that, geez, it's going to be hard to be a favorite because the inset may have to go. If I already got the money hiding under it. The reason for that, get away with this, is that the routes just became a little bit too complex to count. In a sense that I think in any of the games that you see, though, this one had highlighted it because they were so complex to count and so painful because of the different the different meanings to what the board kind of configured as and whatnot, that I was really, really having trouble because of it. And that's where I came to the kind of concept that, I don't think I'd be having that same level of problem if I was playing it in an opposed game. I probably would still have a little bit of clunkiness around it, but it would clear up and it would be easier to cope with in a multiplayer game. And as such, I think this one gives a lot of interesting means, a lot of interesting choices in terms of what you want your end game to go for. Obviously, getting 2 trains on a company is just sweet, and if you can hook up a pair of Ks with each of those, you get a good run. You got this weird thing of the Bank of England, which, yeah, I didn't mention those. You got these Bank of England stocks, which go up in value as players take out loans, so they have some capacity to go up in share value. That pretty much happens in a tight little span of the game, at least for the one that I played. Because I think taking loans early, although it may be a good strategy, may be a way to keep your company from ever swallowing or something. You'll never make you'll never make a big stock value, but maybe you can make it up with that excess money. And it gives you something. In effect, it's like a swallow in terms of your stock value. But you're putting away $100 a round, which might be very, very powerful early in the game when swallowing doesn't get you that kind of money. That may be the way to get to the lots of dots all over the board and a big diesel train. There was another thing that I left out, which was the E-trains. So there's a kind of train that doesn't count as a train. It's just an extra revenue generator that you can tag onto a company. And that requires different kinds of track than everything else you're building. It requires going out to Alice Springs, which is way up here, and there's no reason to go there if you're not planning on doing an E-train. And I think if you're not planning on it from the beginning with whatever company you got, you're probably going to be focusing on the crescent along the coast and making all your money here and not worrying and not getting anywhere near here. And by the time it comes out, it's going to be extra work to get there, work that you can spend on getting your run better. It's a cheap train, though, and it adds a fair amount of excess value to your company, and maybe another strategy, like the diesel. For the diesel to work, you want a big, big run, lots of dots all over the place, and connecting up as many Ks as you can, and you can probably score a humongous, humongous run that way. But the only way you're going to get there is by doing things that are going to keep your stock value really, really low. Those things may be plausible if you're running an early company, and there's two early companies. One starts out with the president's share in somebody's hand from the privates, and one starts out with an extra share the way the Penn does in 1830. If you're running one of those companies and you don't have a whole lot of shares in it, it might work to try to build that sucker up with early loans. You're not going to sell your shares. You want to run that company. Getting the shares lower price means you can pick them up and swallowing at a later point. You got to be careful you don't fall into receivership, but you might be able to cook up enough money that you can build yourself something really, really impressive towards the end of the game. It would take me several more plays to start getting an idea of just how much you can engineer your end game here. You've got all the options you do in 1830, except for leaving a bunch of shares in the bank pool. That's not going to do you any good. But you've got options of swallowing with a company and keeping its stock value low and building up a lot of cash. You got options of trying to arrange the trains so you get a couple permanent trains. That definitely works well. That's what the winner did in my game. Using a feeder line to do that, again. Using, of course, it actually just fell on someone. And that tends to happen in 1830 and a number of other games as well. Somebody is able to either orchestrate or just falls into, and usually it's somewhere in between, getting two permanent trains that are cheap, that don't take a lot of effort to do. And that person usually ends up winning because of that. Anyway, I'm really intrigued with this one. I would like to play it opposed at some point. I think it would not be a hard one to play opposed. First of all, the hardest barrier is out of the way with that track counting towards the end of the game. It's painful. I think that becomes much, much easier, and that's the only real gripe I have about the game. And then the other thing is trying out these different choices to be able, to try to orchestrate some kind of victory that I didn't get here. Because I'm afraid of going into receivership. It's a bad thing, and I think it is in almost every case. Therefore, I want to make sure that I play sort of a cautious game. Well, that cautious game got two of my players into the dumpster. So there's no safety. Like, your naive view of what safety is may not be the case. Anyway, feels like a pretty damn good one to me. We'll see, as time goes on.